I'd say I've had just about enough of the so-called insiders running the Defense Department. I think we ought to give Pete Hegseth a chance
because he's got two insiders.
All the criticism of him is that he's not the expected Washington pick, and I'm just saying to you that the American people just voted against the expected Washington pick. So he's got 20 years in service, Afghanistan, Iraq, 2 Bronze Stars, Princeton, Harvard. Yeah, he's on TV, but so are the rest of us.
President-elect Donald Trump is filling a lot of his cabinet spaces, and he's filling them rather rapidly and decisively. And there have been some eyebrows raised about some of them, but no more so than last night's stunning announcement that a Fox News host and 20-year Army veteran Pete Hegseth will be your new Secretary of Defense. Now, Hegseth has an impressive resume, but you wouldn't know it if you're watching CNN, MSNBC, the broadcast networks, or reading newspapers. No, you'll have this news delivered to you the way Joy Reid did on MSNBC last night. Here she is delivering to her dwindling audience the news of Pete Hegseth.
The former and future president is moving quickly to fill the clown car and round out his cabinet before he changes his mind and fires them all. Moments ago, Trump announced that he has selected Fox weekend morning show host, you can't make this up, Pete Hegseth, to serve as Secretary of Defense, because why not? The former...
Okay, so a couple of things here, Joy. First of all, with your choice of makeup and hairstyles, varying colors, varying lengths and such, I would refrain from any clown references if I were you. It just conjures images, ma'am. I'm just saying. Work on toning all of this down before you call anyone else a clown. That said, if we're reducing the entirety of Pete Hegseth's career and resume and qualifications to Fox News weekend morning host, well, you're either ignorant or you're lying to your audience. He graduated from Harvard and Princeton, if that matters to anyone out there. And he is a 20-year veteran, a retired officer from the United States Army. He served at Gitmo as well as combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's the recipient of the Bronze Star twice. And in his civilian life, post-military, he has been a tireless advocate for not only veterans and his fellow combat war veterans from the global war on terror, but also active duty personnel, where he has been pushing back and pushing back hard, very, very hard on the state of the Pentagon and the leadership right now in the Pentagon, how politicized it's become, how, well, there's no other word for it, how woke it's become. They've lost sight of their main function, which is to be the biggest, baddest military on the planet, so that no one would even dare threaten us or our allies. And if they do, well, they will feel the blunt force of our boot on their ass. That's what our military is there for. And that's what Pete Hegseth seems to be advocating. Now, I'll be honest with you. I have a lot of friends who have served in the military, who, you know, help me out and advise me on military-related issues. I never served in the military, and I certainly don't want to speak on behalf of people in the military. However, you don't have to be in the military to have an opinion on who your Secretary of Defense should be. We are the people in this country. It is our government that we control and direct, and the Pentagon, by definition, is run by civilians like you and me. So our opinion is valid whether we served or not. That said, I draw on the opinions of friends of mine who have served, and last night my phone was kind of blowing up, and it came in 3 different categories. Former military who are all in and think that Pete Hegseth is the perfect choice to shake up and fix the problems at the Pentagon. Another side of the equation of retired military who think that he is in no way experienced enough to run that bureaucracy. And even though he served, doesn't have the big picture national security credentials to be able to effectively run the Pentagon. And then the third category are people who have reservations, but are willing to stay open-minded and give him a chance because, well, we need someone new. We need a new direction for the Pentagon because the same old has not been helping or working. I tend to put myself into that third category as well. And just so you're fully informed, those who are gravely concerned about Mr. Hegseth as Secretary of Defense, at least the people who were communicating that to me, well, they also happen to be people who, after the military careers, ended up working in the military corporate industry. They worked for all of those contractors and had relationships with those contractors that do business with the Pentagon and the military. And I think that that's noteworthy. Those who have hesitations about Pete Hegseth also seem to be those who have been able to gain stature and wealth within what we now pejoratively refer to as the military-industrial complex. Listen, we need a military-industrial complex in this country. It's a good thing, but it's not the only thing, and it certainly shouldn't be running things. And I think that's the whole point of Pete Hegseth being there. I like the fact that he hasn't gotten rich off of the military industry. That's actually a good thing. It allows him to be objective as he takes over that job. And the things that he's been saying about our military, well, I think that it's instructive. And it allows me to be open-minded, if not optimistic, about how Mr. Hegseth might run the Pentagon. Here's a good example.
There's a chance to course correct it, but it would take the new Trump administration going after it really hard.
How would they correct it?
Well, first of all, you got to fire, you got to fire the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and you got to fire this. I mean, obviously, you're going to bring in a new Secretary of Defense, but any general that was involved, general, admiral, whatever that was involved in any of the DEI woke shit, it's got to go. Either you're in for war fighting, and that's it. And that's the only litmus test we care about. You got to get DEI and CRT out of military academies, so you're not training young officers to be baptized in this type of thinking. And then, whatever the standards, whatever the combat standards were, say, in, 1995, let's just make those the standards. And as far as recruiting, to hire the guy that, did Top Gun Maverick and create some real ads that motivate people to want to serve. And there's lots of other ways in which you could identify who gets promoted and what, but there's an ethos change. I mean, there's a reason people don't want to serve, because they don't trust that their senior leaders are going to have their best interest in mind in combat. I know there were mistakes made on our tours all over the place, but I, at least for the most part, had a sense that my senior leaders were committed to the completion of the mission for the right reasons. And maybe there were strategic differences and all that other stuff, and it wasn't always perfect, but that trust is broken, and you have to reestablish that trust by putting in no-nonsense warfighters in those positions who aren't going to cater to the socially correct garbage.
All right. Now, this is incredibly important, first, because the substance of what he has to say, because he speaks from experience, and he obviously has been speaking with not only people who are currently serving, but people who are gravely concerned about the direction of the military and can quickly spot exactly what the problems are and where the problems are coming from. That's important, number one, in terms of the substance, is what you just heard. The second thing, and maybe this is just my own personal bias because I'm in the business of communicating ideas, it's important for me that somebody in this position has that ability. All right. The person who's going to shake up the Pentagon, and I think since Donald Trump ran on the idea and concept of reorienting some of the misguided directions that our military has taken over the last 8, 10, 20 years, that whoever's going to be doing that needs to be able to effectively communicate exactly what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, and give us updates along the way about its progress and success. Hegseth is a communicator. By definition, that's what he's been doing for the last several years of his adult post-military life. And that's a critical component to this thing. Don't overlook the importance of that. All right. If you remember right, Rumsfeld, when he was Secretary of Defense during the Bush years, he was great at that. He could go to the podium and properly articulate and condense exactly what was going on in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in other areas of the world where the war was going on. You may not like the policies, but he was good at communicating those policies. Hegseth's going to have a team around him actually executing the changes that need to be put in place, but somebody's got to be the one who does the interviews, who does the press conferences, and who can properly communicate to the American people exactly what's happening, not just for our sake, but also for the men and women in the military, so they're not in the dark. Part of command is being able to properly and clearly communicate to those who serve under you. That skill is not something that you can just read in a book. It's something that you get that's inherent to you. Hegseth's got it. Also important about Mr. Hegseth as he approaches this job is he understands who the enemy is. If you ask anyone in the military right now or anybody with national security experience, if you ask them what's the biggest threat for America on the global stage, they will give you one 2-syllable word. And it's not Iran, as Kamala Harris said the other day when she was running for president. It's China. And Hegseth gets that.
The Pentagon is in the book, the exact amount of years, but in the past X number of years, 10, 12, 15, the Pentagon has a perfect record in all of its war games against China. We lose every time inside the Pentagon war games. We know what our real capability. You see, we didn't even get to this part of the war on warriors. I mean, the military-industrial complex, the way we procure weapon systems. We're always, the way our system works, the way our bureaucratic system works, where the speed of weapons procurement works, we're always a decade behind in fighting the last war. Whereas China, we have, what did Rumsfeld say? You go to the war, the army you have. We have the army. China's building an army specifically dedicated to defeating the United States of America. That is their strategic outset. Take hypersonic missiles. So if our whole power projection platform is aircraft carriers and the ability to project power that way strategically around the globe. And yeah, we have a nuclear triad and all of that, but a big part of it. And if, 15 hypersonic missiles can take out our 10 aircraft carriers in the first 20 minutes of a conflict, what does that look like?
Yeah.
I mean, and if they've already got us by the balls economically, which you pointed out very well, with our grid, culturally, there's plenty of elite capture going on around the globe. I mean, and then microchips and everything. Why do they want Taiwan? They want to corner the market completely on the technological future. We can't even drive our cars without the stuff we need out of China these days. I mean, they have a full spectrum, long-term view of not just regional, but global domination. And we have our heads up our asses.
Yeah.
All right. That's critically important too. And the focus on China is something that the military is already trying to rectify, but they've been sent in so many different directions. They need clear leadership. That starts with the commander-in-chief, but it certainly will be aided by a Secretary of Defense with that same vision. So I was monitoring how the various morning news outlets today were covering this story. During my morning radio show that I do in Washington, D.C., I've got all the TVs on in my studio so I can see what's going on the various cable networks as well as the local stations here in Washington. And it was a fascinating thing. On Fox News, Fox and Friends, obviously they were reporting on their colleague, Pete Hegseth, now nominated as the Secretary of Defense. And they play B-roll video and still shot images of Hegseth while they talk about him. And every single one of the pictures, every single one of the videos on Fox News showed Pete Hegseth in uniform, either speaking at an event at the podium in sort of a formal officer's attire, or in country from his combat days in Afghanistan or various other moments of his combat career, dressed in uniform, carrying a firearm, showing the American people that Donald Trump's selection and nomination of Secretary of Defense is in fact an actual real live warrior, a recent warrior who's been in country, as little as 7-8 years ago, I think. You switch over to CNN and MSNBC, and they were doing the same discussion, and they were showing B-roll and photographs of Pete Hegseth, but all of those pictures showed Hegseth on the set of Fox and Friends or at some event acting as an anchor for Fox News or delivering a speech at CPAC. That was the B-roll they were using. They were just describing him as a television host on Fox News and a political activist at the CPAC conference. They weren't actually saying or certainly showing anything about his military career. And the one topic of conversation, the one subject they focused on the most with regard to the content of Pete Hegseth's character or his perspective and worldview on the military, it all boiled down to this clip.
I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal, has made fighting more complicated. We've all served with women and they're great. Mm-hmm. It just, our institutions don't have to incentivize that in places where not traditionally, over human history, men in those positions are more capable.
There you go. He is opposed to the idea of women in combat. And what does he know? He only served in combat. And it's amazing because it took what I think it was 9 years ago, I think, or maybe 10 years ago, when Obama's Secretary of Defense decided to go ahead and allow the first look at women in combat. This is 10 years old at the most, this policy of women in combat. At the most, 10 years old. But CNN is acting like, there we go again. Those women in the military are going to have to trade their uniforms for the Handmaid's Tale outfits because of this Neanderthal who wants to turn back the clock. This is his position. This is his view. He'll do what the president tells him to do, of course. And which women in which combat roles is something certainly that even women in the military are open to considering. Is a woman flying a fighter jet the same thing as a woman in a submarine or on a aircraft carrier? And is that the same thing as a woman in the United States Marines in an infantry position? Well, that's a discussion that we're willing to have, that we should have as an American people, citizenry. I think it's fair to say that flying a jet is not the same thing as being in a foxhole. If we still have foxholes. Do we still have foxholes? Not sure about that. But trust me, this is what they're going to try to get him on. This is what they're going to try to get him on. Women in the military. But while we're talking about how CNN is discussing this story, let's not forget our pal, Scott Jennings, who was on the panel last night as this story broke. And imagine being Scott Jennings and having to defend Pete Hegseth's credentials for the job of Secretary of Defense against that stalwart, brilliant military mind, Carl Bernstein of Woodward and Bernstein fame. Because, Carl really knows everything there is to know about being a Secretary of Defense and running the Pentagon. Well, that's what Jennings had to do last night, and I think he did a pretty good job. I think you'll agree.
Anyone have confidence in the current leadership of the Pentagon and the way the defense situation has been operating for the last several years? I mean, from the Afghanistan pullout, which was an extreme debacle for which no one was held accountable. We've had spy balloons flying over the United States. We built a $300 million pier as a public relations stunt, which wound up killing an American service member. I'd say I've had just about enough of the so-called insiders running the Defense Department. I think we ought to give Pete Hegseth a chance because he's got two
insiders.
All the criticism of him is that he's not the expected Washington pick, and I'm just saying to you that the American people just voted against the expected Washington pick. So he's got 20 years in service, Afghanistan, Iraq, 2 Bronze Stars, Princeton, Harvard. Yeah, he's on TV, but so are the rest of us.
By the way,
I think he ought
that
to
list you just gave is really interesting because you highlighted a bunch of things that the civilian leadership of the country decided on. In the military, their job was just to execute. They execute.
How did it go?
I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
How did it go?
In terms of the decision making, you're assigning decision making responsibility to the military over things that civilians were responsible for.
So you make a good point. The civilian leadership made decisions, and then the people they put in charge of the Pentagon carried it out, and it was all pretty much a disaster. So now we have a new president who I think got elected in part because of some of those disasters, and he's going to put in some of the non-insiders in charge of not just this agency, but a bunch of them. Now, look, they've got to perform. They've got to perform. I mean, we got 53 U.S. senators that are Republicans. And Pete Hegseth, he's an American hero. The man won 2 Bronze Stars for his service, and he's been a champion for veterans. He's going to have to go up there just like everybody else and prove his knowledge of how to do this job. He's not immune from that, but we ought to give this man a chance.
Of course, give him a chance and keep an open mind about it. And it's pretty remarkable to watch this all pan out as they try to reduce this man's entire life and legacy in history to, well, he's a host on Fox and Friends, a morning show host. Well, let me just say, I'm a morning show host too. And I'm not qualified to be Secretary of Defense, but there are jobs that I could do in the Trump administration. Not that I would take them, because then I'd have to leave you, and I wouldn't want to do that. But it's obscene what they're trying to do to Pete Hegseth. Of course, he deserves confirmation. The president of the United States appointed him. Let him get the job unless there's something extraordinary that comes up about his past or his abilities. But I don't think that there should be. Again, 2 Bronze Stars in combat, where all of these people who are criticizing him, most of them didn't serve at all. And one other thing. The people who are currently saying that Pete Hegseth is not qualified to be Secretary of Defense, these are literally the exact same people who were just fine with Richard/Rachel Levine as the Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services. They were just fine with Pete Buttigieg and his qualifications to be Secretary of Transportation, going from mayor of South Bend, Indiana to Secretary of Transportation. No one said Pete Buttigieg wasn't qualified for that. But I've got one even better. Literally every single person who is questioning Pete Hegseth's qualifications to be Secretary of Defense were just fine with the idea of Kamala Harris being Commander-in-Chief of our military, or Tim Walz being one heartbeat away from being Commander-in-Chief of our military. Think about that for a minute. Pete Hegseth? There's no way he could run the Pentagon. But Kamala Harris and Tim Walz can be the boss of the guy who runs the Pentagon. Get out of here with that. Get the out of here with that. Well, the election went our way, right? And so we can all take a collective exhale, since we've been holding our breath wondering who would be sitting in the Oval. Now we can get to work on some major issues the country's facing. And one of the most significant is our national debt. The fact is, our country is broke. And that debt is a house of cards that can't quickly be dismantled. So the strategy remains the same for you. Diversify your savings. So many things are out of our control, even out of President Trump's control. It's important to have a safe haven for your savings. Birch Gold Group can help you out with this. They're going to help you convert an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. And the best news is it does not cost you a penny out of pocket. You want more information? I know you do. Text my name, Larry, to 989898. Get your free info kit on gold. Right now, through Black Friday, you're going to receive a free 1-ounce silver eagle for every $5,000 purchased with Birch Gold. Diversify your savings with Birch Gold. Text my name, Larry, to 989898. Claim your eligibility for free silver today.